First of all, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade, and to thank you all for your presence. I would like to introduce our today's speaker. Sasha Karalić is a visual artist and writer. The recurring subject of his work is the relation of public discourse to the prevalent ideology. Saša Karalić lectures at Gerrit Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam. The title of today's lecture is Majestic, plural, Collectivism in Contemporary Art and Politics. Also, I would like to thank my colleague Željko Radinković for organizing this event, and I think we can start. Dear Sasha, you have a word. You can start your lecture, please.
Thank you, Miloš. Thank you for this introduction. Thank you for the invitation. Indeed, I have to join the words of thanks to Željko Radinković, who has organized this lecture. Maybe just to say a little bit more about my position. As you mentioned already, I'm trained as a visual artist. But before that, I also studied literature in Novi Sad in Serbia. That was the literature of now diseased country of Yugoslavia. It's in accordance to that, my practice consists both of writing and of visual work, and especially with my novel that appeared last year in Belgrade, published by Geopoetica. So these two practices kind of inform my work, both writing and visual work. I will today, in using some of philosophical concepts, I will not go in their depth because I'm not qualified for that, but I will just use them as a backdrop to let's say the general issue that I try to cover. I will, in a short time, I will try to cover quite a lot of ground, so bear with me. It might get sometimes a bit much. And please just feel free to stop me or to comment on what I'm saying in any way. So I'd like today, also when it comes to language, we have decided today to do the lecture in English because of the international audience. But if you have any need to, if you want to ask me in one of the languages of the former Yugoslavia, I speak most of them, even though I'm the most fluid in Serbo-Croatian. So please feel free also to address me in that way. I will share my screen with you now. Let me see. Do you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So as the title said, today I will talk about collectivism in contemporary art and politics. There is I will argue, or I will try to argue that on the both seemingly opposite sides of the political spectra, both on the left as well as on the right, there is the tendency to use the state as a final fulfillment of a collective desires. And that in that way of the using collectivism, in that process, art often dissolves either into philosophy or in state propaganda. The four segments of these lectures, this lecture, are loosely connected. They are not connected in didactic way, but I treat them more as a kind of four parts of the same discussion. I'm just going to run fastly through that so that you know where you are somehow later in the lecture. So the first segment, right Hegelians, talks about the right view on the collectivism. So, and talks about, especially in relation to the Hegel's dialectics and to Hegel's idea of the objective spirit, and also brings about the idea of the end of art, the Hegel's idea of the end of art, and also just briefly how the right sees that as well. Gesamtkunstwerk Stalin follows the argument of the Boris Groys in his book with the same title, in which he says that he argues that Soviet Union was perhaps the biggest total work of art ever made, And of course, this part talks about the left attitude towards the collective, or the far left possibilities of treating collective in such a totality like a state. In Power 100, those two lines of exploration will be projected onto today's contemporary art discourse, and to see how they are played out in today's art. And the last fourth segment is going to shortly present my work from 2012 called Square, which talks about possibility of discussing post-ideological constellations. So I'm going to start with the right Hegelians, and talk about how the right Hegelians treat, or how they use the Hegel's philosophy. Why I do that is because the collectivism was earlier associated mainly with the left and with the communist project, but it resurfaced in recent years mainly on the right, with the right-wing populism actually claiming the political space that traditionally was occupied by the left. I will not here analyze the wider social implications of this new brand of collectivism or its political consequences, but we'll instead focus on the right ideal of collectivism and how it is manifested in the state. So how the right Hegelians see the state as a manifestation of their ideals. In order to get there and to understand how the right Hegelians use Hegel's philosophy, I have to very briefly talk about the basics of the Hegel's philosophy. Well, it is basically something that every philosophy student knows, but I think it's important for us to have that background within the structure of the lecture. So Hegel, some of you know, Hegel sees reality as a process in which the spirit, the idea, which he calls spirit, becomes increasingly aware of itself through a series of oppositions. And in that process of idea, the realizing itself, he makes distinction between the subjective, objective, and absolute spirit. Of course, they lead one to another. Subjective is to objective, objective to absolute. And in this subjective spirit, to that spirit, the individual human individuals belong, is the lowest step in the spirit becoming self-conscious. And in that, the human individual becomes conscious of his spirit and capable of being a subject. So this is a key word, and that is also what traditionally we refer to as a thing that separates us from animals, because animals do not have that level of consciousness. Our ability to be a subject and to be aware of the fact that we are subject, that we are human beings. Now I'm going to quickly just go into the absolute opposite of the subject, and that is the object, and that is the second step of development to the spirit, in which the subject embodies its otherness and is alienated from itself. So it is literally objectified. The subjective spirit is objectified in different type of spiritual artifacts. And the most important area in which this happens, according to Hegel, are the family, civil society, state, and history. And this is the point where the Hegel actually defines very clearly the relation to let's say the state or to the collective organization, and he claims that objective spirit actually expresses the necessary progress of history. So only in objective spirit we can see the history at work, if you like. So he claims that all actions of the past, the establishment of institutions and the waging of wars are seen by him in terms of the dialectical self-development of the spirit. So nothing, according to Hegel, is coincidental. Everything contributes to this unfolding development. But the individuals themselves, however, are coincidental. Their actions, both good and bad, serve the common good and the interest of history and progress. They are no more than tools of the spirit. So individuals are only tools of the spirit. This is an important point, because that's exactly where the right Hegelians, where they base their theory. And this is all because the individuals cannot calculate the consequences of their actions, and therefore they are, according to Hegel, expendable. The right Hegelians see that objectification of the spirit in the nation state. And for them, the nation state is really it is the end point of the history. It is the final affirmation of their holy trinity of religion, family, and property. The right collectivism, the right Hegelians, they despise the parts of socialism and the left collectivism that also bourgeoisie and middle class tend to despise. And that is exactly the point in which they're annoyed about the left socialism, which is usually against religion, suspicious of family. It tends to take people's property in different forms through the regulations and taxations and so on. So right-wing Hegelians, right-wing populism is very happy to give you your family, to give you your church, to give you your property, as long as all these institutions serve the nation state. And the nation state, in the right-wing view, the view of the right Hegelians, becomes really the central unit of their theory. It becomes the focus, the end of history, and this, quote unquote, the source of happiness. And this is actually the quote from Donald Trump. In Hegel's philosophy of the right, in the chapter about the state, he says that supreme duty of individual is to be a member of the state. Now, of course, the right Hegelians take that quite literally and bring it into the more orthodox and more conservative side. We also have to know that the right Hegelians were not as successful or as influential in the history as their antipode, which is much more famous, and they were called young Hegelians, and the most prominent representative of them is, of course, Karl Marx. They did stay within the constraints of the tradition, let's say the church, the establishment, politics, and so on. But I want to mention them here because there is a certain return to those concepts in nowadays. And that connection that the contemporary right-wing populism establishes to the old and familiar forms of collectivity, that's religious and national, is the main reason perhaps today of its enormous success. So that after the modernist project failed, and after the long reign of the postmodern deconstruction, the collective desires started to be objectified again in the ideal of the nation state, along the well-worn paths, and these are the paths of the nation and religion. And to argue in that context, in that concept of the world, to argue for political change for them is to attack the ideal of the nation state. So the status quo is kind of the predominant thought in this theory. This complete disconnection from the modernist idea of progress, or the left reading of Hegel's dialectics, makes the current right-wing populism develop a rather distinct way, a view of the future. So the modern optimistic view is replaced by the dramatic ending of things, the end of history and the end of times, are both performed within the parameters of the nation state. So the right Hegelians see the spirit not only objectified in the state, but also elevated to its absolute form and returned to itself. So the nation state becomes the end point in the process of the spirit realizing itself. And even, I put my comment here, even though somewhat depressingly. But now, as in the end, to kind of round up this segment, I'm going to talk about where the art moves in what the view of the right Hegelians or right-wing populist towards the art. And the end of history is seen by the right Hegelians indirectly implies also the end of art, but in a very different way than Hegel anticipated. Hegel sees art as an instrument of the higher self-realization of the spirit. The right wing sees its instrumentalization in relation to state and profit. And that needs the little explanation. What do I mean by that? Instrumentalization in relation to state and profit. And if the current trend of the right wing, of returning to the good old times, continues, it will then it will morph, it will become more and more, art will be in service of representing the ruler's power, just like in all good times. And here, in that view of art is seen as an instrument of power. So something that can be traded on market and can be used as a confirmation of the prevalent ideology. Even so-called critical art is often used in the same way. The criticism of the system is used to show that system is open and democratic, and art is absorbed in its smooth functioning. This is, of course, all possible because art is willing to surrender its, let's call it messianic or avant-garde function, and to comply with the power. But this type of the ending of art, seen by the populists, by the right Hegelians, in my interpretation, that is very different than how Hegel saw art. For Hegel, artists are tools of the spirit of the age, expressing what is historically necessary. So they're just kind of the result of the zeitgeist. They create only what has been prepared and imposed upon them by the spirit of the age, irrespective of who they are. And so artists too, as individuals, are essentially, according to Hegel, expendable. Hegel sees art as an instrument of the higher self-realization of the spirit, which he calls absolute spirit. So I just want to explain a little bit also what he means by seeing the art as a manifestation of the absolute spirit. Because in absolute spirit, the spirit returns to itself, but this time enriched by the externalization, by being outside. And there, the opposition between the subjective and objective spirit is now reconciled at a higher level. And this explains why Hegel assigns art, religion, and philosophy to the realm of the absolute spirit. But in that assigning the art to the realm of the absolute spirit, he gives it the lowest place because he believes that that in absolute spirit, where there is a reconciliation between subject and object, between inwardness and outwardness, between abstraction and tangibility, is still dominated by external sensibility, by intuition. So that's why art is taking the lowest level. And the second level is religion, because the reconciliation in between the subjective and objective is mediated also partially by the sensuously and partially rationally, while of course the highest form in which the spirit becomes conscious of itself for Hegel is philosophy. In philosophy, Hegel says, the spirit fully returns to itself. Art and religion do not have the necessary self-understanding. This only happens in philosophy. Philosophy transforms sense perception, art, representation of inner feeling, which is religion, into the pure form of self-understanding, the absolute content or idea, the absolute truth, if you like. And in that way, the spirit fully returns to itself. But so, to conclude this, in order for art, according to Hegel, to climb up the ladder towards the absolute, it needs, therefore, to become philosophy. Hegel has announced that this will happen, this will happen in Romantic art. He saw the tendency of art morphing with philosophy, becoming philosophy. But as we all know, there is a long history after Romanticism until today of development of art. And I'm mentioning this here because I do see tendencies of art doing exactly that today. And I will talk more about that in a third segment of the lecture. I hope that you're still with me. I'm going to move to the next segment, where I will talk more about the view of the left to the state, and also to how the left or the extreme forms of the left thought are using art. I will do that by following the book of Boris Groys, which is written in 1988, when the Soviet Union was still existing, which is not unimportant in relation to the topic of the book. I'm going to start with a quote. This is the beginning of his book. in which he says that the world promised by the leaders of the October Revolution was not merely supposed to be a more just one, or one that would provide greater economic security, but it was also, and perhaps even to even greater measure, meant to be beautiful. The unordered, chaotic life of past ages was to be replaced by a life that was harmonious and organized according to a unitary artistic plan. This is a very provocative thought. I think that Boris Groys very well knows what he's doing, especially in 1988, publishing that book in Germany. He is, when, of course, there was a huge criticism both inside and outside of the Soviet Union towards the system. He is claiming that Soviet Union perhaps was the biggest total work of art, Gesamtkunstwerk of all times. In this plan, the role of the Communist Party leadership was almost the role of an artist, says Groys, whose material was the entire world. And of course, the Marxist revolutionaries do not, they negate the lament of Descartes, that he said that he cannot organize even his own thoughts, how he can organize anything else, let alone society. Revolutionary Marxists actually think that individual thoughts are only part of the material world that needs to be ordered. So the type of social organization in which the thinker lives, they say, determines his thoughts, the individual thoughts. Thus the new rational thought can only arise out of the new rational order itself. This is truly an avant-garde idea. The collective thoughts are organized along the lines of the new social organization, where art and life are brought together to the highest, but also the end point of the social development, emerged in ideal unity. In 1919, Kazimir Malevich wrote that all creation, whether of nature or of the artist, is a question of constructing a device to overcome our endless progress. Here we see that for the Russian avant-garde, the endless need for progress is actually a problem. And all the creations and what artists do in their view is there to overcome the progress, to land and to arrive to a certain point when things are being finished, when they are being done. This avant-garde artists find the end of progress and the end of time in the form of the new social organization, in the creation of the new world and new state. This fact, Boris Groys has in the book, ironical comment on that. He said that this thought that new world, a new state is at all possible, is also rather irrational thought. And he claims that the thought is rational because it was made within society reality that was still not harmonious. This kind of reorganization of society proposed by the avant-garde artists and by the Soviet artists in the beginning of the 20th century have been proposed and even tried more than once in the West. But it was in Russia that such a project was completely successful. Nobody dared before the Russian Revolution to implement such a merciless deconstruction of the past, even though the revolutionary ideology was imported from the West. Russia was far more willing to organize all life in new and yet unseen forms and to be subjected to an artistic experiment of unprecedented scale. And now it is very interesting what happens if you treat the whole state. So if the Soviet Union is treated by those in power and by those that created, according to Boris Groys, that is, as a work of art, what happens then with the art within that structure? The art that was made within that structure was known as a social realistic art. And it was, of course, looked down from the West and criticized as the lapse into barbarity, as a kitsch of the masses, and treated largely as a non-art. But according to Groys, social realism was not created by masses, but was formulated in their name by the well-educated and experienced elite. This has nothing to do with the tastes and needs of masses and everything with fulfilling the grand project of the new Soviet state. If the whole state is treated as the total work of art, the visual art within the structure has a very particular role and function. It's not there to perform a certain aesthetical role, but only to support the grand social structure. Therefore, it didn't need, like in the West, to justify itself all the time and to all the time fight for its independence and freedom, but was openly used as ideological cheerleader and as a state propaganda. This is, according to Groys, and I do also agree with that, is a truly avant-garde position. Art is the manifestation of will to power, and it takes the whole society as its material. This is in contrast to the somewhat naive and positive notion of art that gradually gained the currency in the 20th century aesthetics. In this view, art is independent from power and based on individual autonomy and freedom. In fact, as we know, art through history was frequently used to embellish and glorify power. The social realism of the Soviet state was strengthening and supporting the grand collective project of building the powerful new state. In that state, the dream of avant-garde was fulfilled and the life of society was organized in monolithic artistic forms, though not in those that avant-garde itself had in mind. Here we see that art dissolves in a state apparatus, both as its aesthetical base and as the state propaganda. So these are very, let's say, courageous statements, both from Boris Groys and me bringing it here today. But I will now in next segment, which is called the Power 100, I will try also to illustrate and to see how both of these tendencies, both of these ways of looking at society and looking at the state play out in today's world and today's contemporary art world. Today, in today's seemingly pluralistic world, there are different approaches of art simultaneously at work. From those replacing it with activism and dissolving it in ideology, to those who treat it as a commodity or turn it into academic topic. In order to illustrate this, I will use the example here of the Power 100. Power 100 is an annual ranking of the most influential people in art, published by the Art Review, which is a big famous art magazine. And even though this list and this kind of lists are regarded by many people, including myself, as a not trustworthy, questionable, or even straightforward silly to make such a list, this kind of list, especially this particular list, is widely shared and is very much talked about, and it does, in the end of the day, influence a lot of decisions and secures a lot of jobs within the art world. I'm showing you the list from the 2020, from last year, and we can see that at this list, this is I just have 2 pages of that, that we see that several forces are at the same time at work. First of all, what is the most apparent on this list is that list is dominated not by individuals coming from art world, but by activist groups and movements. Number 1 prominently stands Black Lives Matter, which is an activist movement that, as Art Review explains, has come to symbolize a global reckoning on racial justice. Number 4 stands Me Too movement that denounces sexual harassment and abuse of women. And on number 14 is the Artist Collective research agency, actually, Forensic Architecture, that investigates human rights violations. For this, for the first 2 entries have nothing to do with art. The influence is of the purely political and ideological nature. The third one, the Forensic Architecture, is the art collective, formally functions as an artist collective, but their projects are set as an activist, investigations, and the only connection that they have with art is that they use art channels and infrastructure as their presentational platform. So this Forensic Architecture actually does not make art, but it is producing the projects which are presented within the art world. So what all this has to do with art? But more importantly, are we allowed to pose this question in the light of the urgency of subjects and social concerns addressed here? The common agreement is that we shouldn't, and art is led to miss the step here and to give advantage to ideology and activism, often gazing at itself through the lens of the self-censorship. Censorship and self-censorship, I think it's very important, which usually, like it did in Soviet Union, grows within the ideological constraints, is justified here by the just goals. As long as the collective agenda is correctly emancipated, some individual freedoms have to be sacrificed, along with sometimes a reason and accountability. I'm going to give the recent example of the traveling exhibition of the Philip Gaston, who is an American painter, died 30 years ago, was organized by 5 museums in Europe and the US, and was this year postponed, effectively canceled because they postponed for 3 years, because of complaints or assumed complaints by the activist groups fighting for the racial justice. The main reason for this assumed complaints was that some of the Gaston paintings feature Ku Klux Klan figures, which are smoking, driving cars, laying down, doing everyday stuff. The fact that Philip Gaston was a politically engaged artist and anti-racist who tried to unveil racism in our everyday life, to point out that we are all to some extent racists, including himself, because some of the figures also shown painting, escaped activists completely, even because the complaint reached them. Somewhere in the activist echo chambers, it was decided that the first visual layer of the Gaston's work represents its content. What you see is basically what you get. This simplistic and one-dimensional way of the reading images has, of course, nothing to do with art, but also not with the basics of visual communication, and everything with blindly following a certain ideological patterns. No matter how necessary certain activism might be, here we see how ideology eats up not only art, but its own fabric, its own flesh, refusing actually its best representatives due to the ideological blindness. Now to not to think that the whole list is being surrendered, so to speak, to the pure activism. On the art review list also stand the representatives of the old times, quote unquote, old times, when art was used to embellish and glorify those in power. On the number 11 is Darren Walker, philanthropist and president of the Ford Foundation. And on number 12 is Adrian Chang, the Hong Kong collector. These two gentlemen connect big money to the contemporary art in an old-fashioned way. Patronizing hand of the powerful man, is extended here to help arts and artists in need. But with a neoliberal twist and according to the prevalent ideology. Adrian Chang, for instance, uses art as a financial asset, while Darren Walker spends a significant amount of the Ford Foundation tax money on different art institutions. But both closely follow the prevalent ideological guidelines as well. Walker wants, through the Ford Foundation, as he said, to catalyze leaders and organizations driving social justice and building movements across the globe. So he is a leader in the social justice movement, or he wants to be one, while Cheng built the K11 Art Foundation that promotes the contemporary Chinese art and, his own words, builds new Chinese culture. So both also kind of quite close to the prevalent ideology. This kind of utilization of art doesn't see art as a mirror of society, as the cliche says, but merely as a mirror in which the rich man sees reflection of his own wealth and importance. This market-based instrumentalization of art is, of course, nothing new. It perfectly well fits within the right-wing return to the quote-unquote better past, when art was truly integrated in the working of the system, made in the name of the king or the church, and served only as a tool of strengthening the power. This is comparable to the function of the social realistic art within Soviet Union, but not to the social context in which it appears. The free market of today has no artistic ambitions, nor neoliberals wish to participate in the creation of the total work of art. The avant-garde approach to life doesn't maximize the profit and thus has no place in the market-oriented ideology. And in the end, I'm going to also address indirectly also the context in which this lecture is happening, and that is academia. And in the end, we see also the academics prominently appear on the right review list. On number 3, we see the French academics, French economist Felvin Sarr and art historian Benedict Savoy. And on the number 10, which is prominently always positioned on this list, stands Judith Butler, who is American gender theorist. Well, this influx of theory is nothing new to art practice, of course. But in recent years, we are witnessing a certain academic turn in the way the art education is being organized and structured. Like never before, art is subject to academic prominence and merits. So much so that besides countless master programs that popped up after the Bologna Agreement promoted them, we have nowadays waves of PhD programs for artists organized almost at every art academy. This marriage between art practice and theory in the most functionalistic way is still at its very beginning, because having often artists struggle with the constraints of the academic discourse. But the tendency is certainly on the rise. The prerequisite of the high and non-commercial art is to gain academic credentials in order to be taken seriously even nowadays. And if this trend continues, we will see art reaching the top of the Hegel's dialectic ladder, art becoming philosophy and dissolving in that process, dissolving in philosophy. Here we see how forces of ideology, profit, and academic discourse influence the contemporary art and make it subordinate to other, more dominant forms of social interaction. Okay, for the end, for the last segment of this lecture, I will show my work square. I'm going to show one small part of the video, but we have tried before. The quality is, for some reason, is not very good. So we're going to try to show it. If its quality is too bad, please just tell me, and then I'm going to tell you where you can look at it online. It exists also on YouTube. I will start by just describing the work shortly here. This is what we're looking at. Is the photograph from 1981. The work, before I start, talks about possible, as I already mentioned, about possible post-ideological constellations, and starts with this photograph that I found in my photo album, which is from 1981, and it shows the group of the youth on the top of the hill in the northwest Bosnia, not very far from Banja Luka. And they're building the big sign spelling the letters Tito, which is the name of the then just deceased president of Yugoslavia. And within that ideological framework, building such a sign had a very particular ideological function. Its aim was to show the solidarity and to show the attachment to the socialist past, the socialist path of the great leader, and it was done actually totally. It was totally self-managed. It was not ordered by the government. It was just made by the youth. The sign has stayed on a hill. Was maintained because that structure is quite fragile. It has to be painted annually and taken care of. It was taken care of until let's say the end of the 80s, and then because together with the ideology that was fading away, the importance or the need for this sign was fading away along with that. So in 30 years from then until 2012, when I made the project, that whole area got overgrown and in the bushes, in trees, and the sign disappeared. 2012, I returned. I gathered some of the previous participants of this action, and some new ones, and I asked them to deforest, to clean the area, and together with me to find the stones of the old sign. Later, around this sign was added a 5-pointed star as well, and to build a new sign. And this is the new sign. You can see also still the leftovers of the star around, if you look better. And the only thing that I did suggest to them the only direction I gave is that this sign should be political sign, but without predefined political agenda. So everything that the way how the poetry should be performed in that sign on that location was up to those who built it. So during the building of the sign, we had also recorded discussions during which the participants talked about the possibilities of what to put in a sign, what to do with it, about some kind of the self-management, self-organization, political level. And all that became the 30 minutes video that I want to show to you now. I do really hope that this is going to work now. And if it is too bad, if it is stuttering, or if you can't read it, the subtitles, please do tell me, and then I'm going to tell you where you can look for it online. So this is we're going to watch just around 5-6 minutes, and then we're going to end the lecture.
Yeah.
Tvoja ideja da u taj kvadrat stavimo 4S, to je srpski simbol. To je tvoja ideja.
Znači krst mora podijeliti na 4 dijela.
Ja predlažem i svako od ovih ljudi ima pravo predlažiti.
Znači 4S to bi značilo da bi se onda pretvorili u nacionalni simbol ili nacionalistički simbol.
Pa ne, nacionalistički ne.
Ne?
Nacionalistički Vlado.
Ne, nacionalni grb je nešto drugo.
Ja se slažem sa njim da stavimo 4S, znaš zbog čega, kada svi mogu i Hrvati, i muslimani i ostali, svi svoje dizati i sve.
U Srebrenici
praviti. Da, možemo i mi, ali mi znamo za druženja, znamo za sve, da bi čitav civilizovan svijet ide, da mi nismo genocidan narod.
Ovo je naša sela.
Da smo mi fin narod i miran.
Sve u redu, ali imamo svoje da ostavu, kad već praviš
svi stari ljudi, borili smo se
da to bude znak
za svoje i to, ja mislim da zaslužuju oni što danas nema danas sa nama njih, da to zaslužuju.
Ja nosim 11 vinara, nebitno, to je najmanji problem.
Stvarno neka želja mine koliko pogled od...
Ratko, za taj bunar, on je sad stav zarast. Nije on zarast, on ima i fino kamen odvoj, pokopač, šak, tunč, sve je.
Aha. Tebe to spremiti iz njih.
Da dođe vidim kram. Ja sam dao njemu ovo pokop. Ustav ga je.
Ima poskoka evo. Opa, ne smije niko kamen digni. Idemo još onaj otuda ući. 1,65 m i onda ćemo ukrstati špagom.
Što je svego, švabo?
Fertik.
Gotovo? Ukrstili?
Ako imaš želju i potrebu da prevedeš, evo ova petlja da sam zavezao je tu, tako je tamo i strane smo sve prošli jednake u oko.
To je to. Rukavice, da? Nađe one što slaži.
Gore, Bora. Ali ovo je malena, ali vidite ona.
Ima li što ovo šiša treba?
Treba li mama pograb?
Pa makaze. Ustav farba. Farba.
Pa zamisli sad da je umjesto nas 30 koji smo radili bilo 300 ljudi. Ne mislim, to je jedno dokazivanje radom samo, ali dokazivanje jedinstvom, znači sjedinjavanjem, dogovorom ljudi.
Slogom.
Slogom, tačno. Znači isto tako, moje mišljenje pretpostavka da se tako može i politički točak zavrti.
Sve dobro, samo pali. Dobro će za nas kad dođe, ne sve radi.
Do kola skrenamo. To treba razmjer sad ovako da smo ljudi. Sad treba razmjer. Sad treba razmjer, Rankane. Razmjer.
Tamo treba vat.
Jel ima još tamo? Ima kod onog čovjeka tamo, da.
Eto, vidi.
Pol litre napravi. Ono jedan pretkan.
Ne znam ja kako to ide, ali...
Znam ja.
Samo nije stiglo.
Da li ćete vi poslije ovoga snimanja filma u njega unijeti 4S ili bilo šta drugo, bilo kakvo obilježje i možete raditi što god hoćete unutra tog kvadrata. Sad za sad on je naš jednako i moj i bilo koga od vas i ovi ljudi koji nisu učestvovali.
Ja sam saslušao vas. Sve nakladno, znači može dometi, ali...
Znaš koju imaš sad?
Ovo ostaje
kvadrat ostaje kvadrat.
Kvadrat ostaje kvadrat. I to je normalno za sve. I nek se ljudi pitaju zašto ovo gore kvadrat, zašto ovo, zašto ono. Ali unutra onda razmisli šta će unutra da stavi. I onda oni sami razmišljaju.
Cilj je okupiti masu oko kvadrata.
Ima i to.
Masu naroda. Da taj kvadrat privuče kao da bude magnet za široku masu. Evo, to je jedan pokret. Osnivamo jedan, kako reći, pokret. Krećemo od nule, ali to se širi.
Neka se čuje, zašto ne, nisi čuje.
To se lako raširi, proširi. Evo, kad vidno, kad smo svi učestvovali fizički, radnom snagom, tako isto možemo učestvovati mozgom, pa pridobiti još 10 ljudi. I mislim da će nekada ovdje biti 1000 ljudi, da ćemo neki zborić dovesti, okupiti ovdje. Ali kvadrat kao kvadrat treba da stoji. Poneste to što ima, dosta je, dosta. Dosta. Gotovo! Gotovo! Završeno!
I will stop here. Thank you for listening, and I will take your questions now, if there are any. I hope that you're still there. Milos, I don't hear. I think your mic is muted.
I would like to call the participants if they want to pose a question or our lecture. So please be free to pose a question if you have one. Well, if you allow me, Sasha, I have a question for you.
Okay.
At our institute, we have formed the group for engagement studies. And my question is related to the field of investigation of this group. And also the question is related mainly to the segments 1 and 2 of your lecture.
Mm-hmm.
It consists of a premise and an implication derived from it. Well, the premise is an artist is working for a state on a certain artistic project.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the state stands behind this artistic project. And the question is how we can differentiate the artist's personal engagement from the state's propaganda. On which basis can we differentiate artists' own intentions and beliefs from the propaganda imposed by state through him? In this case, is it possible to separate, to differentiate the artist's engagement from propaganda of state?
Interesting question, and of course the very complicated one. and that's probably the question that we're all facing nowadays. Everybody who is working actively and also gets the subsidies and funds from the state. But I would say that the best is the good old method of following the money, because that's the way also to find out what are the limits of the artist's freedom. Basically, how do you? Basically, it is the especially in today's world, is the money that determines the level of engagement or the level of the state in working of the artist, and that is also one of the things that was in the square was an issue, because the square was produced without any state funding. So it was kind of if you like it in kind of neoliberal vocabulary, it was a private project, so to speak. So there was some kind of minimum money that was being invested in that, was invested by me as initiator, but then the rest was also collected by people that participated. It was also donated and so on and so on. So it was I would say that financial, the background, the base of the activity of the artist can give you indication of what is this connection to the state.
Thanks. So Rasko, our colleague, has one question. Rasko, please.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sasha, for your lecture.
Thank you for listening.
I can't understand why you began your lecture with Hegel, because Hegel was Republican, mm-hmm. and his theory of objective spirit and his theory of state is a Republican one. Mm-hmm. And I think your interpretation it's not quite right about it.
Okay.
But never mind. I mean, especially that subjective spirit is alienated in objective spirit. That's totally false. But never mind that. I wanna put a question. Do you agree that Soviet Union is the greatest art piece in a history?
Why? You mean personally? If I agree with that?
Yeah, because
no, I don't. I don't think this is also not so relevant in this lecture. That it was not I was not showing things that are confirming like my tastes or my view on things, but I'm trying to put in rather eclectic mix of the things. So as you say, the Hegel, I do not exactly understand which part of my interpretation of the Hegel, or rather kind of basic presentation of the Hegel's concepts. You do not agree with this, but I guess that's another discussion. But I was kind of in the eclectic mix, putting together different let's say thoughts or different concepts. From one hand side, you have the Hegel, or not. It's not so much about Hegel's philosophy, but the right Hegelians' reading of his philosophy, together with understanding, also very courageous, very opinionated understanding of the Soviet state by the Boris Groys. I think I did mention that in the lecture, that actually it is in the also the work of the Boris Groys. If you look at all his work, it was meant as a provocation and not as an opinion. Yeah. And therefore, your question, if I think personally, if Soviet Union was really the biggest work of art, no, I don't. But that's also irrelevant, because here we're talking about endpoints of different ways of looking how the state can be instrument in defining the working of the art. So therefore it is a little bit of the, let's say, again, a little bit of provocation in a way.
Yes, I understand. But if you want to make a connection between and investigate the connection between art and the state, then especially radical left Hegelians are in a question. You know, Stalin and all those from Russian guys that made a transparent connection between the state and the art. Mm-hmm. And not right Hegelians, not neoconservatives in the USA, you know?
Well, you see, I would disagree with that, because I think what we, especially, I mean, I do live in the West, the way how the art is being defined, or how the art, and that's why I also come up with the power 100 list, how all those dynamics are played out in art world is much more under the attack of that great right Hegelian spirit than, let's say, of the leftist use of the art. I think that's the way how the art was being crystallized or being brought to that boiling point that I mentioned of the provocative idea of the Soviet Union being the total work of art, that kind of stayed there. That didn't move much. And also, like, in the heads of the contemporary left, if you like. Contemporary left is kind of paralyzed by what's happening right now on the spectrum of the right populism. And I think that right populism has much more of the influence of how art is being used, if you like, nowadays than the left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sasha. We all can see that Željko wrote his question in the chat, in the space chat. So you can, Sasha, please read the question. We all can, and if you want to respond to this, I think, quite complicated question.
Could we say, this is the question from Željko, could we say that this is about an absolutization of the objective spirit, or an objectification of the absolute spirit? The art and the state, objective spirit, are declared to be the absolute. Furthermore, I would add that this is also the trend outside of the political spectrum, left wing. When we think of Willem Ditley, but also other cultural philosophers, we see Hegel's reduction to a kind of phenomenology of the objective spirit. Yes, and I also do not understand exactly what is the question. I think that I do not know some of these concepts here, so I can't refer to them. The art and the state objective spirit are declared to be the absolute. Yes, in a sense that happens. In the right reading of the absolute, and that's I think I also mentioned that in the middle of the lecture, that there is a point in which the absolute is how Hegel sees it. It differs very much from the absolute how is taken by the right wing populism, and that's what I also mentioned in the lecture, that there is this kind of the holy trinity of the property, family, and religion, which actually defines the absolute point according to the right-wing populism. So that is the point in where they differ, of course, and that is, if you like, a certain kind of misunderstanding of the Hegel's philosophy, according to me, by the right.
Thank you, Sasha. Adriana, our colleague from the Institute, has a question, and after Adriana, also Judith Jansen has also a question. So, Adriana, please.
Hvala Miloše I hvala Saša na zaista divnom I vrlo zanimljivom izlaganju. I will now just come back to English because of our other guests. Well, I would like us to return to to the square.
Right.
In fact, I mean, I would like to say that I'm also coming from philosophy. So, but what I found quite interesting was the organization first of the slides, or the first slide where you introduced us to the four topics that you're going to address with this lecture. And to my mind, they were in a way a sign that something is going to lead us to the square, which came the last. But also, since they were not, I don't know, bullet pointed, or somehow there was no causal relationship between the four topics, in fact, it seems also that they are not in any essential way connected. So my first question is, how in fact do you connect them? Not only in this lecture, but obviously there is a connection between the three that then somehow lead to the square. And regarding the square itself, I will definitely take a look at the whole clip, at the whole film, because I found it very interesting, and in fact most interesting. And this is where I find the connections with the other parts of your lecture is how the very same people, or I guess the majority of the people that were there now in 2012, were in fact those that made the Tito sign.
Right.
So I would like, in fact, to you to say something to us how, I mean, I don't know, maybe I read in too much, but how this left Hegelian or the state as the work of art turned into something which is right Hegelian idea, but then once it was done somehow together within different generations and in nature and without money and with this physical efforts, which then can turn also into some kind of, someone said, what we can do with our minds if we can do this with our hands, how that also then turned into, well, this sign which symbolizes nothing or may symbolize many things, how that turned into a beginning of a scratch in which is going to lead us somewhere, who knows where, politically. So
right.
Yeah, if you can say something about that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. It's when it comes to how they're, as I already mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, they're kind of loosely connected, but they're not deducted one from another. I mean, I took that freedom because I am not belonging to academia. I'm an artist, so I decided that I can play this way with theory and with my work, putting it that loose correlation. But there is indeed connection between the different parts, because I explained that I use the left and the right, the view on the state and how they use the art in relation to see how it is played in today's art world, and also to offer my work not to kind of run away from responsibility, but to offer my work as a possible way or possible thinking place, how we can think the ideology within also my art practice. Now about the work itself, as you said yourself, it's just a scratch. It is not really proposing some huge social change. It is in that little scratch or the beginning of something. I think that the most important thing is that it tries to build a political space or the space for politics without giving any predetermined political agenda. If you do something like that, well, anything can happen. So, but in the same time, it implies that anything can happen. And but it is very difficult to function outside of the ideological space, and it is almost impossible. So, at the same time, the project carries in itself certain, what shall we say, sadness, or if you like, or the impossibility of getting there to that place. The place, the square still exists today, but it is maintained only by maybe 2 people. And so, I mean, the thing is that as long as those 2 people exist, the square exists, because as I say, it's a very fragile structure that can just go away. But it is a miracle that it does still exist in those 8 years, that people are still kind of taking care of that. If the politics, new politics or new political space is possible within the constraints of the today's ideology, it still stays unanswered, I would say, also within the project, but also within our contemporary discourse. I hope that I did answer a little bit your question.
Thank you, Sasha. Judith, please, you have a word.
Thank you. Thank you, Sasha. Hi.
Hey, Judith.
Hi. Maybe my question is a little bit related to that one, the one of Adriana, because I was wondering, if I understand it well, you sort of see that, art is sort of becoming philosophy, or is maybe dissolving in academia, or you see this tendency that artists and art educational institutes try to sort of get this same academic status, or and I was wondering whether it couldn't also be the case that instead of art is becoming philosophy, that philosophy could maybe also become art. And of course, this is a little bit, but it's the direction in the other way around. And I was wondering, how do you position yourself within this sort of line?
Different poles, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I do not, well, it sounds great. that philosophy will become art, but I don't see that tendency. I don't see that happening. I think that there is much more influence of academia on the way how the art is being performed, and especially as I mentioned in a lecture, how it's being organized within also art education. And some of us here also, I see Jeroen is also participating, so we know how this works nowadays. And I think that there is much more a tendency to go that way, and not that philosophy is becoming art. How I position myself, I used to run a kind of the practice/theory program at the Lithuanian Academy, and we tried to instruct the students to use the theory in a more kind of, let's say, creative way, because there is, of course, that I also mentioned that in the lecture, there is still some clumsiness or some fear, if you like, from artists being pushed into that kind of the academic world, how to use the theory, how to use philosophy, am I allowed, and so on and so on. And it ends up in creating the amateur theorists, amateur philosophers, and so on, because they are kind of reaching out or stepping into the field that they are not very comfortable with. I think this lecture today is the proof that I might have made some, I don't know, not really mistakes, but maybe some courageous combinations between things. But that's also, I think that the way for the art to also get the upper hand in using theory and not being used by theory.
Exactly.
I mean,
and now this is also a way of intervening within the academic sphere, right? As an artist.
Yes.
So
yes.
in that sense,
yes,
it is possible, but you see another process being more dominant, at least. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And also, I kind of dare to stick my head inside of the academic chamber, so to see if I was going to be cut off for that. So maybe that's kind of like a little bit of the intervention here as well.
Yes, great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Edith. If there are any more questions, please. Please, Francois.
Hey, thank you, Sasha, so much for the lecture.
Hey, Francois.
I really enjoyed. I'm most interested in this the square piece you showed us, and because it seems, yeah, I really like the spontaneity of the action and how you gather that without outside of the sponsored possible economic context. And we can feel this in the video that the people are, I mean, I have the feeling I'm seeing a Yugoslavian roadway being built in one afternoon or something like this. But I was wondering, it made me think a little bit how, when I work myself, I have the feeling ideas are being whispered to me. YouTube is whispering me a possible video to watch, or sometimes I'm not completely self-conscious of the ideas I'm choosing for. Because I found it interesting in the video how it seems they reach a quick agreement to this shape of the square. And I almost missed a bit like some sort of disagreement between the people on, it seemed a bit magical how they came up with that shape. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on, yeah, on it is as well a sort of political discussion they must have had, these people which might have very different views on, and I thought it was a bit, yeah, magical how, oh, this is it, and I wondered if you played a role in this, and if that actually becomes a reflection in its own.
Yeah, well, to clarify that, where the square comes from me. So, and that is, and so that is not, there is no magic there. And that is also, I think, quite clearly marked and made clear in the video also.
Okay, I didn't get it.
So I did propose both the shape and the kind of like the outline of its possible function as a being political design, because I also believe that artists has to also work and not just to give everything in the hands of people. But in a way, how I work in this project, and also perhaps in other projects that I set up in that way, is that I designed the parameters, or I designed the framework in which something can happen. In this case, literally, in a very rudimentary and simple way, I did decide that this is going to be a sign of square, in which something can be then put and as a symbol, as a sign, as a letters and so on. And but there was of course, I don't know, you didn't maybe catch that. Also in the part that I showed you, there was a discussion what to put in, and which was also kind of difficult for me as a maker, because at certain point there was an idea to put in the nationalistic sign, because of course once you create a framework in which something can happen, then you have to allow anything to happen inside of that. Also something which is against maybe my personal ideas of society or nationality or so on. So I had to kind of, in a certain point, I was almost becoming a victim of my own work. It would be very difficult for me to build a beautiful big sign on the hill with a Serbian symbol in the middle, but they were quite close to that. And I could not actually, and did not intervene when it comes to that. And luckily they decided actually to write in the name of the hill and not the nationalistic sign, because they actually themselves said it should be open for all the people and not only for our village. And so yeah, it was that was not very magical, let's say, that part, you know, for me as a maker. But I think it was also very necessary that the work or the process that you start with your work also has to start the process in society, which maybe not all of them are positive or nice and good, but some of them are also dark and reactionary, and maybe I as a maker even don't agree with them. That is the suffering from your own work, as I call it sometimes. If you start process like this, you also have to take the consequences. That's at least how I work.
I mean, I did hear when they were mentioning the 4 S letters, and I couldn't depict the.
Right, maybe you don't. Yes,
it's interesting how let's say the work becomes the right discourse. You offer a platform for it, talks about form and openness, and but I can't not saying that how the work is made. It sits under another hierarchy where you actually would like to make sure it becomes right. So you are, you know, I guess you could have also have allowed it to go wrong, but you rather not. And it's yeah, I'm interested in this relation between the relationship between its process, that how that affects, because you're showing us this video, which is the process. And that's maybe how you can talk about that piece. You can't, we can also go there to see that piece. But through the video, now I'm sort of criticizing the video itself, where I don't believe it, because I'm like, huh? Suddenly they say square. I'm like, this is Sasha just, you know, whispering that. And so I'm wondering just about the form.
Yeah, well, yes, and that is also one of the questions that I often get is the video itself work, or is it the sign on the hill? I would say that it's neither. I think it is the process in which it launched, with all these possibilities or impossibilities, and these are just kind of the leftovers of that process. I mean, so you have the leftover of the video, which functions as a documentation, as a document that the only way to show what happened there, like this, and the sign that stays on the hill, but again, not as an art piece, not as a sculpture, but again, just as a leftover of the action. It's still there. I mean, it can be also seen on Google Maps. I think it was possible to see it until recently. I don't know if it's still there. So there was a way to kind of look at all these leftovers of the action in different ways. And what also I think for me is exciting thing about this piece is that it is so fragile that it can be destroyed very easily. And I think I even had that kind of idea that eventually with time it will get overgrown again, and perhaps somebody is going to discover it again in 30 years and turn it into something else. Maybe into Tito again. You never know.
Thank you. So if there are any more questions, I would like to close today's event and to warmly thank to Sasha for his lecture with very interesting architectonics and arguments. and also to thank all of you for your participation and the question posed to our guest lecturer. So thank you once again.
Well, thank you all for being here, for listening to me, and see you around.